or live streaming. So we no longer have to use handheld mics anymore. So that's thanks to our IT department, thanks to Tammy, who did a lot of coordinating with the right people to come in and get this done. So just looking forward to us being free just to speak and let the technology do its thing and be our friend for a change. So
yeah, but that was the only exercise we got for 7 hours each week.
right.
Was to get up and take the mic.
Exactly. We're only condensed this down to only 30 minutes. So, and those of you that are tuning in, this is a work session, and this is something this board. I'm really proud about that. This board has really seen that this configuration really makes sense to get us off of the dais, to really have informal conversation with our district leadership or other employees. It really helps us, I think, just to get prepared for making some of the decisions we need to make tonight. So for the public tuning in, this is considered a work session. And we, tonight on our agenda is really to delve into some of the policies that we're continuing to work through as we have taken on this revision project, where every one of our board policies will be taken a look at, reviewed. We have the Colorado Association of School Boards, who helps vet these policies for us, looks at their alignment to state statute, and has made some recommendations. And also they are preserving some of the things that are unique to Douglas County when they do that. So we've appreciated their support as a resource as well. I think the first policy we'll take a look at is policy BCAE, which is the Code of Ethics. I don't know, board directors, if you have a copy or if you can see that, I want to just point out a couple things to you. And by the way, Kevin Long will be here at approximately 5:30, he thinks, and then Director Vogel is absent tonight. So just the five of us. So on this Code of Ethics, first of all, this policy is based on the National Association of School Boards. And this is pretty much a typical policy across all school boards that they have. I've added some things that reflect what I think is unique about us and who we are. And I think this is also an important one because as we are anticipating certainly an election, and we know we will have at least one new board director on this board, I think it's important for us to have these systems in place that clearly communicate behavioral expectations, if you will. And just as another preface is to not confuse this as code of conduct. This is code of ethics, which really is about guidelines and providing guidelines for how we want to hold each other accountable for in terms of how we act and behave. So I want to just highlight the bolded things because those are the ones that I've added based on our retreat and based on our work together for the past 2 years. You'll notice the first bullet that is bolded is exhibit the following shared values for decision making and actions: equitability, openness, honesty, servant leadership, and unity of purpose. Just I feel like that was really a pretty powerful time for us where we found that these were our common values, our common ethics, as well as alignment with our superintendent. And so I really felt like that statement still really says who we are and who we want this board to be in the future as well. Any questions about including that in our stuff? All right. The next one is I highlighted where it says render all decisions based on the available facts and my independent judgment, and refuse to surrender that judgment to individuals, special interest groups, or, and I put in political affiliations. Again, I feel like that was one of the things that this board has really worked so hard to do is to be non-political, to be not affiliated with any specific group, but to make decisions based on what we believe is right for kids. And so I felt like that was a good emphasis to put in there as well, so that we never go back to the day where partisan politics influences board decision making. The next one is be mindful of serving as an ambassador of the Douglas County School District when interacting with others. And again, I think we have all had those experiences, whether it's in the grocery store in an informal basis or at a meeting where what we say people really believe is representing the school district. And so I just think that's a standard that we have really set for ourselves to say that we are measured in what words we use when we talk to others, knowing that even during our off times when we're not serving in the boardroom, that people are listening. The other one, next one, exercise good judgment when using social media that is respectful of employees, students, community. Is out of our staff handbook regarding their expectations for employees. But I know, again, that I think we really that for that purpose. So that's a social media expectation. And then the last one, no, I guess two more that I added. One is follow the appropriate channels of communication when a concern is conveyed by referring individual or group to the source who is closest to the origin of concern as possible. Again, something I know that we really worked hard on, that Dr. Tucker has really, I think, done a nice job holding us accountable for as well, making sure that when we get a concern, that we're able to navigate it to the origin of the concern as opposed to us having to take that concern and feel like that we're the ones that have to get it resolved. And so I think we've done a really good job. School board director, and then I placed the oath in there. I just thought that was important because we say an oath, but there's nowhere in our policy where it actually says what the oath is that we've taken. And I know Director Lemieux has many times has stated that verbally in the dais that I took an oath to uphold state statute and the United States Constitution. But I think having it right there in black and white for us to reference is a good idea as well. So I'm not going to go through all of those because you've seen all the other ones that came from the National School Board Association, but I'll just pause and ask for your reaction and thoughts, and if there's anything that's missing that we think we should highlight.
I really like all the additions. I think they're really appropriate. The question I have, and I don't know if it fits in this policy, but is on the one about good judgment with social media. If that's some place we could get some parameter, like, I'm not asking for like a lot of parameters, but I just know that legally there are some parameters that we know about, and to have that accessible, I don't know where that would fit, if it needs to be like an R policy or.
Could be an exhibit.
An exhibit.
I know Mary and I kind of talked briefly about this, especially around First Amendment rights. And really making sure that we're not doing anything that would violate or compromise First Amendment rights. I think what will be interesting is that as that staff begin updating their handbook, I think that will probably be a discussion that HR will have, I would think. And I'm wondering if we might wait until that evolves to see kind of, again, so we can mirror what the system is saying in terms of protecting First Amendment rights, but at the same time, using good judgment. I don't know, Mary, do you have any additional thoughts?
And certainly we can provide guidance from our legal office with respect to the parameters. Clearly, legal advice is subject to confidentiality. And the First Amendment is a very tricky area of law. And so it requires, there is a lot of discussion around the legal parameters and the First Amendment with respect to the regulation of social media, as probably all of you are very well aware of. You just have to turn on the news and listen, and there'll be a mention of, can we restrict this or that with respect to what is posted on Facebook or any of our social media sites. So those same kinds of concerns may well apply to the board. It's an evolutionary area of law, and it is tricky. So we certainly will be looking at that with respect to employees, and then there'll be consistency, hopefully, with the board's expectations regarding code of ethics, of course, depending upon where you're at in that regard as well.
I know too, I mean, even there's some things that we've discussed around an elected official not being able to close their social media account to constituents who want to make comments, for instance. I mean, there's a lot of those little intricacies that might be good for us to get clear about what our responsibilities are in terms of, like you're asking, Krista, in terms of social media and our interactions with our constituents. Yeah.
Can I ask, if someone doesn't follow these particular policies pursuant to school board members, what's an actionable step?
So I just put a brownie in.
Sorry.
So policy governance would say, similar to our appeals process, the first step is that we have a face-to-face conversation with a fellow director if we feel like that they're violating these guidelines. Then the next step would be that the president or vice president is informed if the resolution can't be made. Typically, there's also an opportunity in our governance to say, in a executive session, we can also have this discussion and/or have a full board discussion if it still isn't resolved. So it kind of goes through those same similar levels that we expect when a parent complaint comes to the system. And that's what I like about this, because I think it gives us verbiage for conversation to say, we agree to these things, and I'm having a hard time understanding kind of where you are with that because of this, So I think it gives us some common language to actually confront each other, if you will, if we feel like we're not living up to these standards.
And those steps are in our board policy, in our policy governance.
Yeah.
If you have a concern with a fellow board member.
What are the reactions to that? So, I mean, again, we'll officially do a first reading, but I just want to make sure if there's a need for wordsmithing or anything else is missing or additions, and we took care of that during work session. And then
The only other question I have related to any of the ones that we're reviewing, can you indicate as we go through them which ones we would address with PAC?
Good question. Right now, our practice has been, first is that we allow all stakeholders to weigh in on our first readings. And so with communications, they put that out there for everyone. I think I would use your filter, Chris, in terms of things that you feel like DAC ought to have more of an audience around. For instance, our disciplinary policies, and I don't remember what else we recently had them respond to. There was another policy.
Isn't there two set out in statute that, a couple of categories
Yes.
that set out specifically for that, and I can't recall right now.
Yeah. So like in parent engagement is another
Yeah.
example of a policy.
I was
and
looking at the crosswalking of it and just if there were ones that you wanted or other board members wanted to call out specifically. I do have the crosswalk that are related specifically to DAC statute, but there was a request by board for DAC to review some policies. So I didn't know if that request was specific to just the ones that are in their statute, or were there others that people wanted?
Right. I think that's a good question that we always should have on the dais when we go through a first reading, is to ask the question, who else needs to provide us feedback? And I think we'll do that tonight. And so tonight's, most of our policies are financial. So obviously we want FOC as well as Scott's staff. And Scott's staff has already done, to some degree, already weighed in on some of them. But I think you're right, Chris. I think it's important for us to continually ask the question, is this something one of our committees should also see as well? All right, ready to move on to the D policies, and Scott Smith is here with us. And I thought, Scott, if we could, I appreciate you sending out to us just some suggestions for revisions. I thought if we could just go through those real quick. Hey, Director Long. We're going to start with policy DB, which is the annual budget. And this was actually, we reviewed this back not too long ago, March of 18, if I remember right. But they did some cleaning up as far as some language and some clarity. And then Scott, is there other things in that policy you wanted to highlight that we should maybe wordsmith now?
No, I think the biggest thing on DB was proposed budget and adopted budget were used somewhat interchangeably when they're not interchangeable, and there's some question about dates and which one. So just trying to clean up which proposed budget is the one that typically comes in May, and then adopt is what you vote on in June. So I tried to make this focused on the adopted budget because that is the legal document that you all are voting on. When you look at Section A, it talks about fund balance, and it's imposed upon us by the Governmental Accounting Standards Boards on how we classify fund balance, and there's a new category called committed fund balance, so I added that in as well. So the way to think about it is you walk through it, and it's somewhat in here, but it's not always intuitive, is non-spendable are things like warehouse inventory. You're not going to ever spend that on anything else. Restricted is like your Tabor fund balance, where it's imposed upon you by an outside entity. Committed fund balance is where the board, through board action, has specifically set aside an amount of fund balance. And the example there would be the board reserve that we hold in addition to Tabor. Assigned fund balance are things where we're holding reserves for very specific purposes. And that is staff's recommendation. The board obviously approves the overall budget, but that's the distinction between committed and assigned. Is committed is dictated by the board, whereas assigned is coming from staff. And then unassigned is what's left over. And I tried to make it clear in here is that in that last section where it says unassigned, it says that the district doesn't need to borrow money. One clarification there is that most school districts have to borrow from the state's interest-free loan program for operating needs. I think this is referring to unexpected needs that are coming up that you have to go out and borrow additional funds. I just wanted to make it clear that we're going to need the state's interest-free loan program, that's short-term, no-cost borrowing to us because of the way property taxes flow. So I just wanted to make sure we didn't bar ourselves from participating in the interest-free loan program by the way that was written.
So, and that's where you've added the verbiage notwithstanding the state's interest-free loan program.
Yes.
Just to kind of give us that qualifier in that category as well. Yeah.
So where is this located? Because the one that's on here
I
doesn't have the
Let
additions.
me see.
It's on page 2 of 5.
I believe I emailed it. Let's see. I can resend it to the group.
Oh, okay. I'm just saying, I'm
Yes.
looking at the one that is
Yeah.
attached.
If you look at, Dr. Lemuel, on that one, if you look at A, fund balance is the category. So what Scott has done under that is he's added there's A, B, C, and D. He's added an additional bullet under there for committed fund balance too.
Right. What I'm
Yeah.
saying is I'm not seeing it on
I
this
just
document that's
re-emailed it to
public.
all of you. So
Brilliant.
yeah.
So we're gonna get that to the public so they can take a peek.
Yeah, and actually what we'll do on the dais is I'll just acknowledge the edits that Scott has made as our part of our first reading process. Then our second reading will certainly have all these things finalized before we
Very good.
approve it.
Thank
And
you.
then the only other changes on DB are some of the funds are no longer used. So that just changes throughout time is either choices we make internally or board policy or from the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. So I just cleaned up some of the fund names and removed ones that we don't use anymore to make it clear about that it reflects current practice. But you are correct. We did update this last year when we changed the purchasing threshold in DJ. There were many $750,000 references in this document. So in order to have this align with DJ, we changed this one as well. And that's mostly around the contingency spend in section C.
All right, then DBR, which is a regulatory process.
Can I ask a
I'm sorry.
question about
Yes, please.
Yeah. So, couple things. I think as a part of our board retreat, we talked about asking that the FOC look at our site-based budgeting and review that.
That's in R.
It's
That's
also
annual.
here,
Oh.
because it says, in addition, the Board of Education believes decisions made closest to the student are the best decisions. And while I generally agree with that, I'm wondering, and I'm not thinking we're in a position to really make a decision about that, but is that, to me, that's something we're asking the FOC to look at, because I think decisions are best by focusing first and primarily on all of our students and making them equitably. And sometimes, I'm not sure that those decisions are best made at individual schools. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there, like, that's the idea for what I think we're asking FOC to look at.
And I hear what you're saying, but because FOC hasn't looked at it yet,
Right.
I'm not sure
I don't
right
think
now
we
is
can
the
change it.
appropriate time to change it. Although
I
it does match our board goals, and this policy doesn't really, because of the equity piece, doesn't exactly match our board goals.
Right. And that's
Could-
kind of my second point.
Could we add anything that talks about equity as well?
I was thinking it would fit where it says that last bullet point, all decisions shall be made honestly. Could we add and equitably for students? Or is that gonna just throw a wrench in a system that we're under review?
No,
Well, we've already taken some
Yeah.
pretty great steps towards equitability in our budget.
And I think there's a commitment there, and so the board knows, I was looking at this more from a factual or practice standpoint, not necessarily a philosophical standpoint, and deferring that to all of you to see where you want the policy to go from a philosophy on budget. So I think those types of things, as I looked through it, some of it is old language that we've had in there, but it's really, when I was looking through it, that's language that's more dictated by the board than staff. So I think any of those changes are fine. We have taken a lot of steps in equity lately and knowing that there will be more to come through the strategic plan. But I wanted to make sure my review was much more on the factual or current practice versus the overall philosophy.
Well, given that the strategic plan is going to be implemented sooner than the FOC gives us recommendations, I would agree with you that we need to add a little bit of language that gives us that flexibility to start already building equity purposefully into our budgets, annual and long-term. So I think that we need to maybe talk about a way to add that in there. And, I mean, you've already, do you have thoughts on that, Kristen?
Well,
No,
she-
I think that that's kind of where I was ending up. I just wanted to throw it out there for you guys to consider, so.
I agree with Krista's recommendation, because as Scott said, the first part of this policy talks about the board's beliefs as opposed to procedurals. And so I agree with Krista's recommendation that all decisions should be made honestly and equitably. I think that's a good addition because that's unique to who we are and what we believe. And it aligns with the future strategic plan and our goals and all that. And I would also just say, decisions made closest to the student are the best decisions. I don't always interpret that as being that means that every student gets, that means SBB is the only tool. I mean, I think when it says closest to students, we're looking at what are the needs of the students.
Okay,
You know,
that, I can
so-
interpret it that way
yeah,
too. I just
yeah.
wasn't sure what we meant.
But I like adding the word equitably, Chris.
Actually, I have the same remarks regarding to this. So my suggestions is, in the middle of page 1, it say, in additions, the board believes, so currently have 5 bullet points.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know whether we could put something like, decisions made based on the principle of equity in public education. I mean, something similar to that effect.
An additional bullet point.
Yeah, based on the equity in the public educations, I think that is,
Well, we are public education, so I don't know if we need to keep writing that we're public education.
Right.
But I think that, again, I guess I'm wanting to understand Director Lung, because Chris has said we're gonna add equitability on that 5th bullet. All decisions should be made honestly and equitably.
and.
Does that get after what you're trying to emphasize?
Yeah, I want to make a 6th bullet point to emphasize that. But I'm okay, we just add the word after honesty. In the last 2 years, I think the board has been talking a lot about the equitability instead of, equal. Not quite sure whether adding it into the bullet point number 5 would.
We could separate
I
that
mean,
and
I-
make number 6 be,
yeah.
all decisions shall
Yeah.
be made equitably, just so that it's more highlighted. I understand.
Well, and I will say, we have a duty to the financial health of the district. And these bullet points are pretty student-centric versus the financial health of the overall district. And so I think we need to pay a little bit of attention to that as well. And so with equity, that is considering the entire district. So maybe we could add a bullet point about equity with the financial health of the system in mind, something similar to that, because again, I'm just looking at these, it's really student-centric, which is a good thing, but it cannot be at the detriment of the financial health of the system. And we have some things that we do right now that actually hurt our system more than help it. And it's in the name of what's best for kids, but you know, we only have so much money to work with, and we have a responsibility to our taxpayers as well. So I think we gotta be mindful of that.
Let's ponder that. I mean, unless I hear a recommendation of what we need to revise, and we can certainly do that on the dais too, as you guys are kind of soaking this in a little bit. I don't know if equity needs to be brought up into the opening paragraph to make it more, more of a value up there. I don't know. So, but unless, I will listen for that for you guys. Let's move on to the next thing, and then.
I'm sorry, I still have one thing I
That's all
wanted
right.
to bring up. It may or may not be necessary to say this, and I may not have my thinking correct, but if we look at bullet point 3, all school stakeholders, students, parents, staff, school leadership, and community members shall have a voice in the school level budget decisions, that's done through the SAC. Or is it done through every SAC in our schools? And does that need to be called out? And the reason I'm asking is that I've attended several SAC meetings where the voice of the school level budget decisions, it isn't really very well understood. I don't know if we called it out and said through the SAC, then maybe that's clearer, maybe it's not necessary.
My thought, I guess a couple thoughts I have. One is that, to me, this bullet speaks to all voices, that contribute. I mean, SAC should be representative of the parent community, and the principal should be gathering feedback from staff and.
That's part of
et cetera.
SAC training
Yeah,
versus policy.
SAC does have statute that says that
Right.
they're required to
Right.
be that advisory to the principal for budgetary kinds of things. So, I don't know, I guess I'm just
I
speaking
mean, some
to,
school districts literally have SAC chairs sign the budget,
Mhm, mhm.
and we used to do that.
Mhm.
I don't think we do that anymore. So I guess I'm just wondering, and maybe it is just through the training of SAC, that makes sense.
Respond to that too. so.
And that can be a first step. I mean, the nice thing about policy is if we get down the line somewhere, we can revise it, we can update it. There, but if we're not seeing that it's being done through the SAC training, then maybe we can move that policy. Unless you think it's already important enough to put it there in the first place, and then the accountability goes to Dr. Tucker to make sure that's being done. Is that a good accountability piece?
Again, state statute to me even goes over him.
Right,
Quite
over
honestly.
us, it goes over us, it
Yeah.
goes over, yeah,
But,
our
you know.
policy can't, no.
Yeah, so accountability, I think, is there, but whatever you guys want to think about in terms of that. But I think we've discussed it, and let's ponder it, and then if we can go on to the next policy, which is the regulatory policy of the budget. And Scott, is there anything?
The only thing I changed was on the second page around how, and I don't love the language that I proposed there, and I mean, that's something the board can talk about, but there are things in there like innovation and choice grants, strategic planning grants, and how carryover is reviewed prior to the awarding of additional money. And this goes to Director Lemieux's point around, there's only so much money to go around. So as we're allocating, highly impacted is still current. That part's not outdated. But as we look at a fixed amount of money and trying to figure out how to allocate that among the finance team, school leadership team, the academic team, that is a factor that comes into play to say which schools truly don't have resources of their own to be able to meet this need. And of course, that's a delicate balance in how much discretion does the school have in carryover, how much, can we dictate that carryover comes into that play? I think that's it's an art, not a science to look at, if we only have a certain amount of money, how do we get the best return on that investment? And quite frankly, the best return on that investment isn't putting it in a school that has, 6% of their budget in carryover, right? They can figure out a way to fund that themselves. So,
Can you clarify, kind of remind us of, does carryover money include fundraised dollars that we don't dictate how that's spent? Because that can be a little bit of a confusion, that should this carryover money only
It should be-
mean district
yeah.
money? It does not include
So
fundraising dollars.
when you look at carryover, and there are multiple buckets now, this gets all convoluted. Yes, fundraising donations are included in there, but what we're referring to here does not include fundraisers and donations. So maybe a clarifying statement says, available carryover funds, not including those funds attributable to fundraisers and donations, should be managed to approximately 3%. And this work came out of the Fiscal Oversight Committee, and really our schools were clamoring for guidance on what's the right amount of, because I don't want to hoard money, right? It's a delicate balance of I want to be fiscally responsible, but I also want to spend as much of this year's money on this year's kids. And so what we had said is that if Tabor is 3%, the board's reserve is 3%, that's generally 3% at the school seems reasonable, seems fair. And that, so as it starts to get higher, that's where the executive directors of schools are talking to principals of what's the plan, because it could be totally reasonable. We're saving up to do X or whatever it may be, or I'm projected to decline enrollment over the next 5 years coming out of Mr. Cosgrove's office. I want to make sure I smooth out that decline in enrollment over the next few years. But it's a delicate balance there of how much oversight do we have to carry over, how much discretion do schools have, how does that all work together? But I will definitely say that carryover always comes into the discussion when we look at allocating additional resources to make sure that those resources are having a high return on investment, not sitting there as they get allocated out.
So really looking at, Scott, some way to wordsmith this to qualify what carryover means, like you said, that it does not include these kinds of funds. And then some way of indicating that that there's a way to monitor that, so there's not just the school leader that makes those decisions, but it's a systemic kind of decision as well. Okay.
And so kind of following up on that, I had a question because it looks like it says the academic leadership team as well as IT staff shall review the carryover and the plan that each school makes. I'm just curious, and I'm sure I can understand this if someone explains it to me, but why is it not just the academic leadership team? With, IT giving input, gifted giving input, all the different departments giving input, but the academic leadership team ultimately being the ones that review the plan.
And they are. So the way the highly impacted has normally worked is it is the academic leadership team as well as, and this year is Ms. Gross-Taylor, having that conversation, but then us involved of, I know that school's asking for that. We've looked at their budget, there's a way for them to fund it. So make sure, again, with a limited pot of resources, that we're not allocating money to places where we might already have resources. The reason IT was in here is it related to the technology refresh. So this was changed a while back when funds were tight and looking at, if you're sitting on a lot of carryover, you can refresh your own computers, and we can make sure that other schools that don't have money, we're refreshing theirs. That was the intent at the time. Now that's changed obviously with the bond funds. We're refreshing a ton of technology all across the district. But that was really as additional dollars were being allocated to schools that were coming from departments, that they were having input into that discussion of, is there a way the school can fund that on their own, or is this something that needs to be funded from a central department at the time?
So maybe now that's not necessary to have IT in there?
I would agree.
Yeah, he's actually crossed that out.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I just emailed it to you. The email I responded to, I apologize. The email I responded to you last night only had directors Ray, Lemieux, and Graziano on it. So I just sent it to the whole board, so I apologize.
So he crossed out that whole
Okay.
sentence, from everything from the team down to those individual funding grants.
Can you describe a choice grant?
That
And
was
is
in the
that something
past.
we still do?
No, so
Did you
that was in the
scratch
past
that one
when you
out
looked
as
at
well?
if you wanted to launch a new program at your school, you could put together essentially a grant application to the central office to have that funded.
And so has that been stricken as well?
That's been gone for 2 or 3 years at least.
Stricken from the
It's
policy
stricken
also.
from the policy.
Yes, yes.
So my curiosity is, why does it call out school accountability committees here and not in the other policy?
I'll take a stab and say this is a regulatory policy.
Thank you.
So it's talking more about procedures. Yeah.
So it was there, it was just in a different policy.
But that's only carryover.
That is.
So I don't know if we want to charge the FOC with helping us with some verbiage, or Scott, if you want to continue to mess with that a little bit, to see if we can represent what you're wanting to represent in terms of carryover.
That would be great, thank you.
Very good. All right, moving on into policy DIE, which I think is an interesting acronym for an audit.
That's how I feel sometimes, to be honest.
Right.
The only changes I made here is that it says to the board within 5 months, it's actually 6 months. So public entities have within 6 months to report the audit, so that's why usually the audit presentation is in December. So I changed that to 6 months. And then the last one was on the amended, it was number 5, it's now number 6. Full disclosure of all instances of non-compliance. I just added the word all known instances of non-compliance. I want to make sure that we don't set ourselves up to, if we don't know something's wrong, that it's a violation of policy, that if we know about it, we'll disclose it. But that we can't be held liable for what we don't know or hasn't been brought to our attention. And then no real changes on DJ, just one word I changed from P card to purchasing card.
Any questions about DIE or DJ? All right. Then we go on to the E policies, which I know we've again shared these with Director of Security Rich Payne, and so they're looking at these as well. But are there any questions about these? We've also farmed one of the nutritious food choice policy out to Brent, Director of Nutrition Services, and he has also responded with some recommendations. Actually, I think these are already, this current policy is reflective of that from Brent. Is that right, Tammy, I believe?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let me go back to security access to buildings. Is there any questions about that, or any thoughts or wordsmithing that needs to be done before we consider it a first reading tonight?
So I have a question. The first paragraph, it says, shall be as deemed appropriate for each school building. I guess my question is, who makes that decision? Like, I'm assuming it's our superintendent. I kind of wanted to make sure we weren't saying that each school makes those decisions.
Security office.
Thomas, any thoughts about that? So that's the first paragraph, the last phrase.
So, yeah, I guess we could be more specific, but I'm trusting that it's understood that the superintendent and or his designee, in this case being Rich Payne, will decide who is or isn't deemed appropriate, having access to buildings.
I'd like to add that language in there. I think we need, especially given the concerns about security, we need to be really specific that we have a overarching policy for the whole district, and all schools are expected to have the same security protocol, and that's a pretty important one, who we let in our buildings.
I have same concern on that sentence also. We need to have a standard district-wide policy instead of, individual school policy, and this is all very unclear on that sentence. We cannot have 91 different school policy in the school building.
Currently we do.
I guess my comment was that a lot of things were struck from this. It seemed like there wasn't a lot of detail
Need to it.
compared to what was. Not that everything that was there was good, but I think it seems like we pulled out a lot from what was originally there. And is there a need to put some things back in to be more comprehensive?
One of the reasons is we will see a policy coming up called Policy KI, which is specifically visitors to schools, which it gets more specific. And so a lot of the language that was taken out of this, we will see again in that KI policy, visitors to schools. And so I'm wondering, even in this conversation, this is more broad in terms of security and access to buildings, whereas we get more specific about who should be authorized as a visitor into our building. So I think that's the reason why that language was stricken, because it will show up in KI.
How about the keys? Is that gonna be somewhere?
What's the keys?
Right underneath that, access to school buildings and grounds outside of regular hours shall be limited to personnel who work requires it and to sponsors of approved student activities, authorized personnel, safeguard against entrance to buildings by persons unauthorized to have keys.
I haven't looked at KI and what the model policy will be, but I think we could certainly look for that as an expectation in terms of having that language in there. What she has said, our CASB consultant has said that that's the reason she's crossed these words out, because it will show up in that policy. And it looks like there's also some kind of an update from the state level regarding security and
Okay.
visitation of schools that she's trying to align to as well, so.
So can we make a note to make sure that we double check when we get to KI?
Yeah.
That we are making sure that
Yep.
who's authorized to come in buildings during the day and at night, and then who's authorized to have key card access to those buildings?
Yep. I think that's reasonable.
So, maybe this is a practice and isn't necessarily needed in the policy, but a one-time annual inspection versus a biannual inspection, and maybe this one says annually, and I'm assuming that means by school district personnel. And maybe it's more of a practice that school administrators do this more often. But annually is really that's a pretty big breadth of time for school inspections to assure the doors are locked and access is appropriate. One whole year is a long time.
Unless you read the whole sentence, and I don't know, Chris, the answer, because it says inspected annually to address these things, removal of hazards and vandalism and any other barriers to safety and supervision. So I don't know if that's the qualifier there for you, that I hear what you're asking is, do we have an ongoing way to be checking security indoors and things like that? This reads to me, though, that there's specific categories that annual inspection looks at.
Yeah, it looks like it's just hazards and vandalism, but then at the top it talks about access.
Yeah.
So,
Could you add like language to ensure checking of access?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because I will say, in our high schools, obviously, they have their own security teams that check the schools every day. I was at a school on a school visit the day it got vandalized at 4 a.m, and they had it covered up before kids even got near the school. So somebody's checking those in real time. So I don't know what the difference is in those real time, if a door gets broken or if a school is vandalized in real time, that's gonna be handled immediately versus an annual inspection.
well, and I'm not
Seems-
necessarily referring to those kinds of hazards. And vandalism, I'm referring to continual access
Mm-hmm.
and checking on access more than annually, which I think probably occurs as a practice. And maybe it's not a policy.
Well, that doesn't seem like a KI policy, because that's regarding visitors to schools. So this is an inspection process. Do we need to add something that caveats it, that daily inspections at the school level, annual inspections at the district level? A minimum of an annual inspection.
Sure. So
Because I think our security teams are out there way more than just once a year. I mean, we're going above and beyond this policy right
That
now.
might be reflected in ADD too, our Safe
Safe
Schools
School
policy.
Plan, yeah.
I think some of that might be reflected there, but.
So let's, I'm gonna put a note to have Rich Payne consulted on that one, if we can. Thomas and Tammy, if we can just make a note of that to see if that language is reflective of something specific that, or that the board's desire is to know that there's consistent and regular kinds of inspections of access. Like, I don't know, Anthony suggested just adding the word secure access into that sentence. But I think annually is also a concern, that maybe regular would be more of the.
I mean, how many times have you walked around a school building as a principal and doors are propped open daily? Or nearly daily, for one thing or another, it just does occur. And unless you're checking, it just does occur.
All right, so let's move off of that one, because it looks like we've got 5 more minutes. Any questions about the nutrition food services? And again, this is one that Brent has already looked at and revised for us. There's a lot of references to ADF, the policy that talks about student wellness. There's a lot of other things that go more in depth about nutrition in that policy that we recently, we did not recently update that one. We were waiting because we wanted to add to that student wellness policy.
Can I ask a question? We had waived, well, we didn't, but a prior group waived the national standards. Have we adopted those back in? And if we have not, why or why not?
Why
National
not?
standards for nutrition?
Yeah.
So we are not on the National School Lunch Program at our high schools only. We are on the National School Lunch Program at elementary and middle schools. It would not be our recommendation to go back on the National School Lunch Program at the high schools currently. One of the main reasons you go on it is because the USDA reimburses you for free and reduced lunch. We cover free and reduced lunch at the high school because due to our demographic, we can make enough of a profit from the rest of our meals that all the kids who qualify for free and reduced lunch do receive those subsidized meals. It was largely around some of the more stringent nutrition guidelines that we struggled to meet, where we would meet 2 out of 3, say on nutrition or on sodium and fat, but miss calories by 20 calories, and you can't serve that. So it was largely to make sure that with open campus that we were providing food that was still nutritious, that students would choose to stay on campus, eat our food, and we think, having our kids stay on campus is obviously something that nutrition wants to do and be with us. I think it's been incredibly successful so far. It does give us more flexibility. I will say that the food we serve is nutritious and healthy. It's one of these things where obviously it's a board decision. I think it's working well for us right now. We have registered dietitians on staff. We have a whole group that crafts menus to be able to do this. It also has to deal with our a la carte items, so not just the reimbursable meals, but the a la carte items, also our Subway franchises that we have. The 6-inch chicken breast on wheat did not meet the nutrition guidelines. That's part of the National School Lunch Program, so we would have to shut down all of the Subway franchises in our buildings as well. There was a lot of things that would have gone into it if we wouldn't have gone off of it. But again, that's obviously a decision for the board to do, and Mr. Craig would be in a better spot to explain all the nuances of
Do the
Oh,
that.
kids who are on free and reduced lunch have access to some of those, or do they only have access to the prepared meals by the district? So in other words, are they singled out, like they're
No.
the kids who have to go to that line
So
and they can't
there
go
is
get a Subway?
no,
We
there's
give
no
them-
way for a student to be identified as a student who qualifies for
That's what I
free
wanted
reduced
to know. Okay,
Very good.
thank you.
So other questions on that policy, and I'm not quite sure some other policy cover that. Right now, I don't see that specifically mentions that the school should be encouraged to take steps to ensure that we accommodate the special dietary need of student. Like for example, people have allergic to nuts,
Right.
things
And that's
like
where
that.
if you go back, if you look at the ADF policy, that's where you'll see that more detailed is in that policy. It's the student wellness policy. And they've done a lot of work to align that with the competitive lunch laws and regulations that Brett Craig has to follow. So there is some mention of allergies in that policy.
So again, I'm just don't know whether there's a need to put a bullet point in there and make sure that we acknowledge there's a need to consider that for our nutrition services,
Yeah.
to take care of people with different type of dietarial needs.
I would look at the ADF, because kind of the concept when we put a policy manual together is we don't replicate language.
Right.
If it's already stated in this policy, that's where it needs to stay, because when we start cross-referencing, that's where we get into this mess. Because then all of a sudden, we have the ripple effect of having to update, X amount of
5
policies.
policies and stuff.
So
Yeah.
let's look at
Yeah.
that, study that,
Sure.
make sure if it's not to your satisfaction, Kevin, let me know. And we'll certainly have Brett Craig come in, talk more about that. The last, real quick, I think on.
One more quick
Yep,
question, just because I wanna make sure, it looks like it covers beverages, but we don't include it in the title. That's meant to cover beverages too, nutritious food and beverage choices. And it says we follow minimum standards adopted by the state board. Is that in any of our policies or, because it applies to like band, extracurricular activities, and we're telling them they have to follow it, as someone who ran concessions for basketball games for 3 years, I wouldn't know what the state educational standards are. So, I mean, I sold regular Gatorade. I don't know if that, so I know it's a small point, but if we're gonna require our extracurriculars to follow it, we need to make it easier for them to follow.
So you'd like to know if we've stated somewhere
Somewhere
the
else,
standards
yeah.
for beverages?
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
We need to people zero from now.
I know, it's gonna be-
Okay, last one, we'll just take a real quick, in case Gautam has any comments on this one, but this is the safeguarding personal identification information. This is a relatively new policy, I believe. But again, Gautam looked it over and I don't believe there was, I think he made some changes that Tammy reflected in this draft. Again, is that correct or not?
I did not reflect.
Did you make any recommendations, Gautam, in this?
No, it's,
Okay,
there's a couple of state laws which already have this,
okay,
a lot of it.
okay.
Do you feel like, is this only for electronic systems or physical records too? That may be only clarification.
It says personal identifying information, it's whatever PII is.
And it can be on paper, like I can print your name, your student ID on a piece of paper, then we're destroying that. So that may be something to think about to clarify this as a policy.
Okay.
But from a computer perspective, software, it's almost always, there's FERPA and a couple of other laws which override this.
Will you give us a glance, and then if there's
Okay.
anything that you think would clarify this?
Just, yeah, from an
For-
intent
for
perspective,
practice.
you can let us know if your intent is any record, whether it's paper, file, electronic, and then that would be something we can look at.
Okay. I think the more that we can include to protect kids' identification, the better. So if you don't feel like that's clearly stated in this policy, let's make sure.
I'll work with Mary and we can get back to you.
Very good. All right, you guys, I know we have about 5 minutes before we need to get on the dais, so we'll bring this to a close. And
Oh, we didn't get to naming the facility.
yeah, but we'll get first reading tonight, so we did some good work to get us more efficient tonight. for the 1920 school year. Wow, I feel like I'm booming. Holy cow. Really, holy cow. Like I should be singing a song. All right, so we begin with roll call. Director Chancho Shore. Here. Graziano.
Here.
Holtzman.
Here.
Mew. Here. Lung.
Here.
Ray here. And Vogel is an excused absence. Before we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, I would like us to just take a moment of silence to reflect and show some respect. I know I speak for all of us on the dais that there's such tremendous grief right now in our nation from past events that have occurred. I would say we continue to be stunned. We mourn the tragic loss of lives and injuries, and our deepest sympathies go to the victims, their families, and friends. So before we stand and do the pledge, if you would just join me for a moment of silence. Thank you. Now please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, next on our agenda is recognition of students and staff. Dr. Tucker.
Thank you, President Ray, directors, our students, staff, and visitors. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the start of the 2019-20 school year. Hey! Wow. I mean, I know we've been busy all year long, but wow. Tomorrow is the official start of the 1920 school year for majority of the schools in the Douglas County School District, and I'm extremely excited to be here once again to serve as your superintendent. And also tomorrow, your board of directors, cabinet members, and other folks will be out visiting students and staff at all 91 of our schools. And I have the pleasure of being joined with Director Holtzman. I think we have the chaparral feeder tomorrow, right? So excited about that. We'll be doing that all day tomorrow, and it'll be my opportunity to start my 91 plus visits to all of our schools in the great Douglas County School District. Now, we've been really busy this year, and before we get to the recognition section, we're going to show you a quick clip of how our taxpayers' dollars have been put to use in taking care of some of our bond needs. Technology, folks? Now, I do apologize, this screen is out today.
Go right behind you.
Summer break. Get ready to break in some new additions at Douglas County Schools.
We have been very, very, very busy doing a whole bunch of different kinds of projects.
Some are more noticeable than others. All are making a difference for our kids. We don't often think about the roofs over our heads.
Some of them are like roof replacements. We did that on 6 different schools.
Some schools will notice changes underneath as well.
We did flooring on 6 different schools also.
New carpets, tiles, or gym floor refinishing.
We're fortunate enough to be getting all new flooring in all of our classrooms. We're also doing some different flooring in tech ed, in our locker rooms. Our school is going to be so much cleaner, so much nicer. It's just going to be a much better place because of everything that's happening in our school.
Do you remember those old bleachers?
Our bleachers are wooden. They're like 20 years old.
We better not have blisters or I'm never going to sit on them.
Rest assured, Nikki. Thunder Ridge, Highlands Ranch, and Chaparral all have new, safe stands to cheer on the home team. Speaking of the home team,
family on 3, 1, 2, 3, family!
The Legend Titans will be practicing on a new hue.
I think it's going to look really cool, make us look sharp.
That cool blue field.
Tell them what you think about our blue field.
More than style, the new turf will help prevent injuries.
It does provide a safe environment for them, and obviously, once again, I think a sense of school pride.
Some of these projects have been years in the making.
I first came on board here in fall of 2008, and we were talking about the FPOD then.
Middle classrooms, as many as we can get.
To do what we do so well at Castleview, but to be able to do it even better because we have the resources, we have that optimal environment where we can provide that education. That's a thrill.
This summer was just the beginning of the work.
We're hoping to make a whole bunch more changes.
Improvements will continue for 5 years thanks to the Douglas County community. And for that, we say,
Thank you, voters, for believing in us. We really do appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for all you've done for our students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much.
thank you for helping us to learn today as we build for tomorrow.
Again, a big thank you to our voters who supported both 5A and 5B. Research is quite compelling, as well as personal experience. When we provide our students with an adequate learning environment, student achievement increases. So again, thank you, and give yourselves another round of applause. So now we're going to move on to our recognitions. While school will officially get started for many of us tomorrow, we understand our good friends at DC Oaks. Mr. Fleshman, you've been in session for about, 2 or 3 months now? No, a month right now? Okay, all right. So at this time, I want you all to come up and we want to honor some really amazing work that's always happening at DC Oaks. And if you have not attended your graduations, I invite every member of our community to at least attend a DC Oaks graduation. So at this time, I would like for Principal Fleshman, along with Miss Mary Hoffman and Miss Kathy Anderson, to please join us. Yes. Yes. Yeah. We're kind of like all over the place today because when the screen is out, so we're normally accustomed to not standing in front of the screen, but this is a great spot. I just want to make our visitors here aware of some of the amazing things that are happening. Then I'll ask you all to tell us some things as well. Now, I understand you just started a new alternative education program for some of our at-risk students, some of our students who are facing some unique challenges to doing a great job of keeping them engaged. So, Mr. Fleshman, would you and your colleagues tell us a little bit about that program so that it's no longer one of our best kept secrets here in the district?
So I was voluntold, so I'll do all the speaking. You're welcome. So last year we had the availability of completing 32 students with their GEDs. We have currently passed 2 students this year with their GEDs, 5 more on their way to completion. So just as a school, we want to give a quick thanks, obviously, to the board, academic cabinet, Dr. Tucker, down to the EDOSs, the rest of our high school principals that are really embracing a program that we were worried wouldn't necessarily be embraced. So we're just very fortunate to be put in a spot where we're able to take kids that we might lose. You know, the world does not need another dropout. So if we can find a way to get a kid even a GED, I think we're doing a great service for our community. So just on behalf of Oaks and all the rest of our high school programs, thank you guys for trusting us with that. And one other note I need to tell you, financial responsibility. Because of the GED program last year, we were able to raise over $1,100. Pearson pays $5 per student per hour. So it was actually a net zero program, even with the students that we scholarship. So we're very, very excited about that.
Any of your colleagues? I know you were, any comments? Yeah, hold on, we're not quite yet, not quite yet. We're going to ask Director Chancho Shore to come forward, perhaps make some comments on behalf of the board and our community. I understand we have a few recognition items, correct?
Yes. On behalf of the board, and having had the personal opportunity to visit you guys, yeah, I am with my whole heart and my whole soul wanting to be able to congratulate you and thank you for the work that you do. Like all of our teachers in Douglas County, you guys go above and beyond. And like all of our principals, or all of the ones I know in Douglas County, you do an amazing job with our kids. I am so grateful, and on behalf of the board, thank you so very much.
So we're going to take a quick photo. Before we do that, I guess I'm full of stats tonight. We talked about improving the learning environment. 39 students will be leaving the Douglas County School District with a GED considered as graduates. Let's give them a round of applause and the work these staff members do.
I apologize, I don't do microphones very well. So just want to introduce Mary Hoffman and Kathy Anderson. Want to say thank you to them. It was really their thoughts behind all of this that got our GED program going. Also want to give a huge shout out to the Douglas County Libraries, specifically Tiffany Curtin, who has just really done a great job of bringing kids, finding kids that have fallen through the cracks. So just want to give these two a shout out for all of their work. We're just, again, very thankful.
Quick photo. Again, DC Oaks, thanks for your tremendous work. Thank you for providing great opportunities for our students. That will wrap up the recognition part of our agenda today.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Tucker.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda, board, is to accept the agenda tonight. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion made by Holtzman, second?
Second.
Second by Graziano. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Chancho Shore?
Aye.
Graziano?
Aye.
Holtzman?
Aye.
Lemieux?
Aye.
Lung?
Aye.
Ray? Aye. Next on our agenda is public comment. The board values diverse viewpoints from a broad spectrum of citizens throughout our community, specifically items that are listed on tonight's agenda and on issues that impact the educational needs of our students. 2 policies guide how public comment to the board is received: Board Policy KE, Public Complaints, and Board Policy BEDH, Public Participation at Board Meetings. Board Policy KE outlines the process for responding to grievances and complaints and explains that the board believes that complaints and grievances are best handled and resolved as close to the origin of concern as possible. Policy BEDH also explains that since the board's responsibility is setting policy for the school district, members of the public should direct their comments to policy matters, and notes further that citizens are strongly encouraged to contact the teacher, building principal, or superintendent first with questions or concerns. The board would like for all discourse in this room to occur in an atmosphere of mutual respect. Everyone in this room plays an important part in modeling appropriate behavior and promoting a climate of mutual respect. To maintain this decorum and mutual respect, I would ask that speakers refrain from using individual names in an offensive manner, as this only distracts from the issue of concern. Throughout the board meeting, the board follows Robert's Rules of Orders to guide it in participating in an orderly and fairly conducted meeting. Under those rules, if a director calls for a point of order, all discussions and comments should stop so that a determination can be made as to whether a procedural rule or board policy has been violated. Therefore, if a point of order is made while public comments are made, a speaker should stop until otherwise directed to continue. Each speaker tonight will be allotted up to 3 minutes to address the board. Please know that this is our time to just listen without engaging in discussion. However, your comments will be reflected upon as we discuss the agenda item that you are addressing. So now as we proceed with public comment, we will begin with those who have signed up. I will call both the speaker and the next individual afterwards. First is Bill James, and after Bill James is Mark Porter. Bill James. We'll do some wait time. Seeing no Bill James, Mark Porter, and after Mark Porter is Sarah Porter.
Hello, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Mark Porter, here from Castle Rock. I'm here this evening to request a change to policy JLCDB that we have been requesting for over a year now. Law HB 1286 was passed and signed into law 15 months ago, allowing school personnel to administer cannabis to medical patients, which my 13-year-old daughter is one. For over a year, the board has given us many reasons that they will not update the policy to reflect the changes in the law that was passed. Reason one is legal reasons, both state and federal. What valid reasons? I don't know. I think we've debunked just about all of them. They're the same state and federal legal reasons that Eagle County here in Colorado faced, but still voted and implemented a change in their policy to reflect the update in the law. So I'm confused how it is Eagle County did it, but this board cannot even put it up for a vote. Does Eagle County follow the same laws? Pretty sure they do. Pretty sure. This board, or their board, has chosen to follow the law as written and update their policy. Another difference in their board is they chose to vote, not you guys. The second reason is funding. Fact, zero. I repeat, $0 have been withheld for any medical cannabis reason. Ask Eagle County. Furthermore, as stated at previous board meetings over the past year, the federal government does not decide how the states spend their funds. Colorado decides how that money gets dispersed. The third reason is it would be too much pressure and responsibility on staff. Are you kidding me? I didn't know that asking an adult if they would or would not like to volunteer, I did say volunteer, was too much pressure or responsibility. Update the policy and let them decide. They had no problem in Eagle County finding people to volunteer. So since this board has decided to pick and choose what parts of the laws they choose to follow, we're going to do the same. My daughter will be at school tomorrow with her medicine. She will not miss another prescribed dose of her medicine due to the ignorance of this board. Through much discussion with the Castle Rock Police Department over this whole summer, they will not do a thing to a card-carrying patient and absolutely don't want anything to do with it. So if the board won't consider changing the policy for my daughter, maybe you'll consider changing the policy for the safety of all the other students, because it is glaringly obvious that every student doesn't matter, and the policy will not be updated for her. So the ball's in your court. I ask that you do the right thing and change the policy. There was a law passed that allows you to do that. So what's the call? Politics or people? Think hard. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Is Mrs. Porter here tonight? All right. Next is Amber Wan and then Brad Wan. I'm sorry, that would be Bonnie Wan.